Okay, as promised, this is the first in a three-part series on keeping corals, and we're going to bring this to you every Monday for the next 3 weeks. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Sir Richard Bullard. We have gotten 10 questions from various customers that we're going to go over with him. And what we would ask is that if you have any comments or you have anything or any questions, especially for him, put it in the comments below, and subsequently we'll address those in the next video. So, on with Sir Richard Bullard, the Aqua Bull.
No. Corals are animals. Some of them have algae that live in their tissue. Oh, hold on. Let's get this. Hi, boss. I'm on YouTube. How can I help you? I'm still on YouTube.
Yes, sir.
Sorry about that, y'all. Okay, so back to the corals. Some that have the algae living in their tissue called zooxanthellae, they need the blue light to be able to photosynthesize. Those are called photosynthetic corals. There's also non-photosynthetic corals. These are ones who typically live in deeper water or in caves and tunnels. They will have food capture methods, polyp, or almost even like a type of sponge where they absorb it out of the water itself. When setting up a reef tank, or any aquarium for that matter, is determine what you want to see when you're done. The last thing you want to do is get animals, corals, that are going to overgrow a small aquarium. Now you're emotionally attached and either have to get a larger aquarium or have heartache. I would say start with something that is drilled with an overflow so you can draw the water off the surface. This is kind of important. We can get more technical in person if you would like, but if you have the overflow box, you can have your sump underneath, your protein skimmer, and all of that equipment. You've seen the waves lapping up on the shore of the ocean. The foam they leave behind is fish poop. Don't play in it, it's nasty. But that's what the skimmer does. It strips the poop out of solution, so it reduces your necessity for water changes. A good protein skimmer will need to be dumped about every 2 or 3 days so it doesn't overflow. From there, current is important for removal of body waste. The corals do poop too. And for import of nutrients. A lot of them use polyps for food collection. So we typically have a wave maker of some sort, or 2 or 3, to move the water around. Some of the fancier ones will gear up and gear down and give you the aloha oi effect. From there, temperature should be stable. We get into the rock work. Some people like to have very large walls of rock. Some people like to have void spaces where they have 2 or 3 islands with areas to swim underneath. A lot of that will depend upon the fish you want to keep and the corals you want to keep. If you like some of the soft corals like green star polyp or xenia, they can be highly invasive. So if they're sequestered on their own little island, they can't take over the world. Lighting is critical. I prefer to replicate about 20 to 40 feet deep in the ocean. If you think about where the shrimp boats go in and out, it's very shallow water, it's nasty yellow color, and there's snotty, slimy algae everywhere. Think about every scuba diving photo you've ever seen. It's almost always blue and purple. That's what we're trying to replicate. At about 20 to 40 feet deep, almost all the red, yellow, and white spectrum is filtered out of the light. The blue light travels the farthest. These corals are designed to use the blue wavelengths and the purple wavelengths to photosynthesize. So the more light we give them in the blue spectrum, the less work they have to do to convert it, and the less algae problems we have. The size is hypercritical. It's why it's great to look around and see what really calls to you and what you really want to keep. If you fall in love with a unicorn tang, for example, not a coral, I know, but the unicorn tang can hit almost 3 foot long full grown. It might take him 25 years to get there, but don't put him in a 55-gallon tank and expect to keep him long time. Coral-wise, because some of the corals are invasive, because they tend to grow over other corals, keep that in mind as you're selecting them. I've found that if you choose corals that are very close in genus, they don't attack each other as much as ones who are not very close. That goes back to where the corals are found as well. The corals on the forereef do not have the ability to defend themselves from the lagoonal corals, and sometimes the lagoonal corals will overtake them and choke them out. Now, that is such an opinionated thing, and I know I have an opinion, but everybody's got one. I would choose fish that are going to be workers first and foremost. If they're in there doing a job, like blennies, they're going to eat algae. You've got dragonettes who are going to keep down your bug and pod and worm population. Tangs will also eat microalgae. The bristletooth will eat the real fine microalgae. The zebrasomas will eat the lumpier, bumpier algae. Sometimes it's okay to let it be just pretty. They don't always have to do a job. There are some, like butterflies and angels, that are designed to eat corals. The angel's mouth actually juts out and grabs so it doesn't get its eyeballs stung by what it's eating. So if you love angelfish, count on them eating some corals here and there. We just won't buy any more of those corals. One of the most common pitfalls with starting up an reef aquarium is you don't allow the body of water to stabilize. You don't allow the biological system to balance before you attempt to add corals. Or, more likely, you put corals in that have a higher demand than what you're quite ready for. There are some corals, chalices are a prime example, that if you are not keeping a mindful eye on magnesium, calcium, and carbonate hardness, they can have a very, very hard time, where things like zoanthids and mushrooms don't care if the magnesium's off or the calcium's off. They don't really use it that much. The top 5 easiest corals to begin with would probably be Xenia. There are about 3 different variants that are readily available. Very, very fast grower. And some people will actually farm it or cultivate it as a form of nutrient export because it strips out a lot of the nutrients from the water, almost like an algae turf scrubber or a refugium kind of thing. I love the mushrooms. There's a bunch of different color variants. They're fantastic. The smooth-skinned mushrooms tend to grow much faster than the lumpy, bumpy ones. They're not as quick to grow most of the time. Leather corals of numerous sorts, shapes, and sizes. They're very resilient. Keep in mind with them that it takes them about 2 weeks to adjust to new light, new water flow. So if they're laying down, ignore them, leave them alone. They'll stand up soon, they'll be fine. That takes us to number 4. I'm a real big fan of Cyphastria and number 5, Stylociniella. And this is mostly personal. Once you have your salinity stable, they just continue to grow. They're not that mindful of calcium and carbonate hardness like others, and they're a great way to encrust the rock and get very, very bright colors. I can try to touch on where the calcium, carbonate hardness, and magnesium are supposed to stay. There's a lot of variables there, and some of them are beyond my scope of understanding. The baseline, if you're running a low nutrient system, very low nitrates and phosphates, is to have your calcium around 400 to 420, your carbonate hardness around 8 to 9, and your magnesium around 1250, 1350. That's parts per million. Typically, if you have a very high dissolved organic levels, nitrates above 40, phosphates above 0.5, you need to run your calcium, carbonate, magnesium a little bit higher to be able to be absorbed by the corals. It's called the Redfield ratio if you want to look into it a little deeper. A very country woman that I miss dearly was asked, is it expensive to do a reef tank? She said, honey, it's as expensive as you want it to be. If you don't know a lot about what you really want, then it's easy to overspend in the wrong direction. Taking a look around, figuring out what animals you want to keep can avoid a lot of unnecessary equipment in the closet collecting dust. The most basic that I can get, it's not easy for me to do, I write in all capital letters. The most basic you can get on equipment is substrate of some sort. I use it mostly for its biological capacity, but it does release calcium carbonate, magnesium, and that is very helpful in buffering. If you don't believe me, look up people with bare bottom tanks. They have a lot of problem with that. From there, a submersible heater. We need some form of water movement. If we're using a filter like the Seachem Tidal that extracts off the surface, we will kill two birds with one stone. The body waste of the corals will have a air-loving side, a water-loving side. It will seal the surface closed. You've seen the oily film before. By skimming it off the top, we've removed that. From there, the quality of water. You can't use city water, you can't use well water. You should use reverse osmosis, DI water. The city water and well water fluctuate in their chemistry, and it's very difficult to keep a stable body of water when your source water is fluctuating. These guys need stability, that's hypercritical. And quality of light. Just because it's, oh my goodness, expensive doesn't mean it's going to be the right intensity or spectrum. So we'll definitely want to discuss that further in person.
Okay, so that concludes our initial coral video, Beginner's Guide to Corals with Richard. Please put your comments below of what you would like, any questions that you would like answered about anything, and he'll be back next week to do it.
Yes, sir. Greetings and salutations, fishy friends. One of the questions we get asked constantly around here is, how do I keep corals? How do I set up a tank to keep corals alive? Kind of like starting a saltwater tank with fish, the most important thing is going to be the quality of water. There are different forms of filtration and equipment that we've gone into in some of our other videos. If you come in, we can point at things when we talk about them, and that makes it easier on all of us. First thing you would do is start with a purified water source. You want to get a reliable tool like a refractometer to measure the amount of salt in your water. I like to mix my new water at least 4 hours in advance before testing it and using it. Sometimes small adjustments need to be made. Where these guys come from, they normally don't deal with swings in salinity, so they're not designed to deal with them. The best thing you can do is make sure all water stays the same temperature, same salinity. That's the most critical. From there, the corals use light to photosynthesize. They actually have algae living in their tissue. So you need a good quality light. There are expensive ones that don't do what you want. Normally the cheap ones don't either. There are many choices, and the shape, size of the tank, and the corals you want to keep may reflect on your decision. I would say the best place to start would be with the lagoonal corals. If you think about a coral reef, you have the forereef where the waves first crash in. It's very nutrient poor, it's very, very, very stable. You have the aft reef that has a little bit more junk in it from everything that's blown off the front side of the reef, and you'll have different corals there. You have grass flats leading up to the lagoon. The lagoon corals are the ones we're going to focus on. They are soft corals predominantly. That means they have no calcium-based skeleton. They're also very, very resilient to swings due to runoff from heavy rains and other things I'm not allowed to mention on this show. From there, get the tank up and running, stable salinity, stable temperature, cycle it out. Some people will cycle it with fish. It's frowned upon by some. Some people will use bacterial supplements and additives to help cycle the tank. Your live sand should help, and it will also help with buffering capacity later. We'll get to that. Once the tank has been cycled and is stable, if you start with zoanthids, mushrooms, pallies, leathers, things like that, they're going to be much more able to adapt to your lighting and your water conditions. As you watch them grow, their shape, their color, and how they're acting and reacting can tell us what we need to know, as well as keep an eye on your tests. Test your calcium, carbonate hardness, sometimes magnesium, and keep an eye on them. Typically, we'll start dosing for those as the corals begin to grow. In the beginning, frequent partial water changes may supplement those elements and keep it stable.